Get back to the kitchen where you belong. The words sliced through the crystal chandelier glow of the Thornhill Estate ballroom, silencing a circle of tuxedos and evening gowns. Avery Cole stood motionless in her simple ivory dress, her dark skin catching the golden light as 300 pairs of eyes turned toward her like vultures sensing prey. She didn't flinch. She didn't explain. She simply reached into her clutch, pulled out her phone, and made a call that would cost the Thornhill family everything they'd spent 4 generations building. Because sometimes the most devastating response to cruelty isn't anger, it's precision. If you want to see how far this story has traveled and how power truly shifts when underestimated people decide they're done being invisible, stick with me until the very end. Like this video and comment what city you're watching from so I can see just how far this truth has spread. The mistake began 3 weeks earlier, though Charles Thornhill III would not understand this until it was far too late. Avery Cole's executive assistant had confirmed the venue booking on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice crisp and efficient through the phone. Ms. Cole, the Thornhill estate has confirmed availability for the merger announcement gala on the 23rd. They're requesting final headcount by Friday and full payment 2 weeks in advance. Avery had paused in the middle of reviewing the Cole Global quarterly projections, her pen hovering above a column of numbers that would make most Fortune 500 CEOs weep with envy. Did they ask who the event was for? I provided your name and company information as requested. They seemed eager for the business. I'm sure they were. Avery's voice carried the faint amusement of someone who'd learned long ago that eagerness and respect were not the same thing. Confirm it, and Marcus, make sure our legal team has the contingency protocols ready. All of them. Marcus Chen had worked for Avery for 6 years, long enough to recognize the particular tone that meant his boss was preparing for variables others couldn't see. The full spectrum? The full spectrum. She'd hung up and returned to her projections, her mind already moving through scenarios like a chess master visualizing 20 moves ahead. The Ashford-Thornhill merger wasn't just another deal. It was the culmination of 18 months of careful negotiation, strategic positioning, and the kind of financial architecture that had earned her a reputation as the most formidable deal-maker in international finance. The merger would create a renewable energy conglomerate valued at $900 million, positioning both families to dominate the sustainable infrastructure market for the next decade. What made it particularly elegant was that neither family fully understood how completely they needed her. The Ashfords had the patents and technology. The Thornhills had the old money and political connections. But it was Cole Global's financial engineering, Avery's proprietary funding structures, and her relationships with international investment consortiums that made the entire transaction possible. Without her architecture, the deal was just expensive paperwork and wishful thinking. She'd structured it that way deliberately. The gala was meant to be a celebration and formal announcement, a carefully choreographed evening where both families would present their unified vision to investors, press, and industry leaders. Avery had been invited as the financial consultant, a term that made her smile every time she heard it. Consultant. As if she were some hired expert offering advice rather than the sole reason the deal existed at all. But she'd accepted the framing without correction, understanding that sometimes power was more effective when people didn't see it coming. The ivory dress had been a deliberate choice. Avery stood in her walk-in closet 3 days before the event, her fingers moving past the designer gowns and tailored suits that typically armored her for high-stakes negotiations. She selected something simpler instead, elegant but understated, beautiful but not attention-seeking, the kind of dress that would let her move through the evening, observing, assessing, without drawing the spotlight she didn't yet want. Her reflection in the full-length mirror showed a woman in her early 40s with the kind of presence that made people recalibrate their assumptions. Dark skin that glowed with health and heritage, natural hair styled in a way that honored both. Eyes that had seen enough boardroom battles to recognize warfare disguised as hospitality. She'd built Cole Global from nothing, from a single office in Chicago to a multinational financial powerhouse. And every step of that journey had taught her that being underestimated was sometimes the sharpest weapon in her arsenal. "You're planning something," her partner Diana had observed from the bedroom doorway, her artist's eye reading the intentionality in Avery's choices. "I'm planning for everything. Avery had corrected, turning from the mirror. There's a difference. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a movie set. Avery's car moved through the Chicago suburbs toward the Thornhill estate, the landscape transforming from urban density to sprawling wealth as they drove. The estate itself was a monument to generational money, 20 acres of manicured ground surrounding a mansion that had housed Thornhills since the 1920s, when Charles Thornhill I had made his fortune in steel and railroads. As her driver pulled up the circular drive, Avery could see the valets already busy with a parade of luxury vehicles. Bentleys, Maseratis, the occasional Rolls-Royce, the kind of automotive peacocking that signaled old money trying to prove it was still relevant. She stepped out into the golden evening light, her simple ivory dress a stark contrast to the ornate gowns already visible through the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows. The first sign of trouble came at the entrance. A young man in a crisp suit stood at the door with a tablet, checking names against a digital guest list. Avery approached with her invitation in hand, her expression calm and expectant. The man glanced up, his eyes moving over her with the kind of quick assessment that people rarely realized they were making. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but service entrances are around the back of the house." His voice was polite but firm, the tone of someone who believed he was being helpful. Avery's expression didn't change. "I'm not here for service. I'm Avery Cole. I should be on your list." The young man's finger moved across his tablet screen, scrolling with increasing speed. His brow furrowed. "I don't see it. Could you spell that for me?" "C-O-L-E. Avery Cole. Cole Global." She kept her voice level, watching his confusion deepen with each word. "I'm really sorry, but I'm not finding you. Are you sure you have the right event?" He glanced past her, as if expecting to see the actual invitee arriving at any moment. "This is a private gala for the Ashford-Thornhill merger announcement." "I'm aware." Avery reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, navigating to her email with the precise movements of someone who'd dealt with this particular brand of incompetence before. She turned the screen toward him, showing the formal invitation from Victoria Thornhill herself. "Perhaps this will help clarify." The young man's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, embarrassment, defensive irritation. Before he could respond, a woman in her 60s approached from inside the mansion, her silver gown catching the light like armor. Catherine Ashford, matriarch of the Ashford family and co-host of the evening, moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied entrance to anything in her life. "Is there a problem, David?" "Mrs. Ashford, this woman claims to be on the guest list, but I can't find her name, and I'm Avery Cole," Avery interrupted smoothly, extending her hand toward Catherine. "We spoke on the phone last month regarding the financial structures for the merger. It's a pleasure to finally meet in person." Catherine's hand rose automatically for the briefest of handshakes, her grip limp and dismissive. Her eyes, however, were sharp, assessing. "Oh yes, the consultant. I thought Marcus was handling your participation." The word participation landed with delicate precision, suggesting something temporary, peripheral. Avery noted it the way a general notes terrain before battle. "Marcus Chen is my executive assistant," Avery clarified. "He handles logistics. I handle the architecture that makes events like this possible." Catherine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Well, do come in. I believe there's been some sort of administrative confusion with the list. David, please make a note that Ms. Cole was invited." The word "invited" carried the faintest emphasis, as if Catherine were doing Avery a favor by allowing the correction. Inside the Thornhill ballroom was a masterpiece of wealth deployed as intimidation. Crystal chandeliers the size of compact cars hung from hand-painted ceilings. The marble floor reflected candlelight from hundreds of sources, creating the illusion of stars beneath guests' feet. Wait! Staff moved through the crowd with champagne and canapes, their movements choreographed to be simultaneously present and invisible. Avery accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and began her reconnaissance. She recognized faces from the financial press, tech industry leaders, political figures who'd come to see what new power center was emerging. The Ashfords and Thornhills had spared no expense or connection to make this evening a statement. What they didn't understand yet was that Avery had spent the last year ensuring she understood every single person in this room better than they understood themselves. "Quite a turnout," a voice said beside her. Avery turned to find herself facing a man in his 30s with the kind of polished appearance that came from expensive schools and assumed futures. His name tag read Gregory Thornhill, VP Strategic Development. "It is," Avery agreed. "Your family certainly knows how to make an impression." "We've had practice." Gregory's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "I don't think we've met. I'm Gregory Thornhill." "And you are?" "Avery Cole. I'm responsible for the financial structures that made your celebration possible." Gregory's expression flickered, a moment of confusion followed by swift recovery. "Ah, you're with the consulting firm. Marcus mentioned you might be here. It's nice to put a face to the work." Avery sipped her champagne, savoring the expensive vintage while calculating how many times she'd be described as with the consulting firm before the night ended. "I run Cole Global. We don't consult. We build." Right. Gregory was already scanning the room, his attention wandering to more important conversations. "Well, enjoy the party. The real presentations start in about an hour." He drifted away before Avery could respond, leaving her with a clear understanding of how the evening was structured in the Thornhill family's collective mind. She was here, but she was not central. She was credited, but not essential. She was invited, but not truly welcomed. Perfect. The next 40 minutes unfolded like a social experiment in class and perception. Avery moved through the ballroom, engaging in conversations that revealed exactly what she'd suspected. People were friendly but dismissive, polite but distracted. When she mentioned her company's role in the merger, responses ranged from vague acknowledgement to outright confusion. A congressman asked if she was with the caterers. An investment banker assumed she was someone's assistant. A tech CEO asked her to fetch him another cocktail, pointing toward a bar with the casual entitlement of someone who'd never questioned whether other humans existed to serve him. Each interaction added data to Avery's understanding. This wasn't mere rudeness or individual prejudice. This was systemic blindness, the kind that came from generations of never having to see certain people as equals because the system had been built to make them invisible. She was cataloging her seventh assumption of service when Charles Thornhill III took the stage. The room quieted as the patriarch of the Thornhill family stepped into the spotlight, his silver hair and custom tuxedo combining to create an image of dynastic authority. At 72, Charles had the bearing of someone who'd inherited power and spent a lifetime convinced he'd earned it. His voice carried across the ballroom with practiced ease. "Friends, colleagues, visionaries, welcome." He spread his arms as if embracing the entire room. Tonight marks not just the union of two great families, but the beginning of a new era in sustainable energy. The Ashford-Thornhill merger represents the future, innovation meeting legacy, technology meeting tradition. Applause rippled through the crowd. Avery remained still, watching. This achievement required vision, courage, and the kind of bold thinking that separates leaders from followers. Charles gestured toward the Ashford family, gathered near the stage. "Victoria and I have spent years working toward this moment, navigating complex negotiations, overcoming obstacles that would have stopped lesser families." Avery's expression didn't change, but something cold settled behind her eyes. Not once in Charles's self-congratulatory narrative did he mention Cole Global. Not once did he acknowledge the financial architecture that had transformed their bold vision from expensive fantasy into viable reality. "We've assembled the finest legal minds, the most innovative engineers, the sharpest strategic thinkers." Charles's voice swelled with pride. "And tonight, we celebrate what's possible when great families unite for a greater purpose." The applause grew louder. Catherine Ashford joined Charles on stage, her silver gown glittering like chainmail. Together they raised champagne flutes, toasting their own brilliance, while the crowd cheered their brilliance back at them. Avery took another sip of her champagne and checked her phone. Marcus had sent 3 texts in the last 10 minutes, each one confirming that different elements of her contingency protocols were ready for activation. She typed back a single word: "Standby." The presentations continued. Gregory Thornhill outlined the merger's technological components with slides full of renewable energy projections and market dominance forecasts. An Ashford cousin detailed the political relationships that would smooth regulatory approval. A hired consultant, actual consultant, Avery noted with grim amusement, presented financial projections that were based entirely on Coal Global's proprietary models without once mentioning their source. 45 minutes into the presentations, Avery noticed movement near one of the side exits. A young woman with a press badge was talking urgently on her phone, her expression troubled. Avery recognized her from earlier conversations, Jasmine Wu, a reporter for a business journal known for aggressive investigative work. When Jasmine caught Avery's eye, she crossed the ballroom with purpose. "Ms. Cole. It is Ms. Cole, right? I saw you earlier and thought I recognized you from the Forbes profile last year." Jasmine's voice was low, urgent. "Can I ask you something off the record?" "You can ask," Avery said neutrally. "I've been doing background on this merger for weeks. The financial structures are incredibly sophisticated, the kind of thing that takes serious expertise to build. But nobody here will tell me who actually designed them." Jasmine glanced toward the stage, where Victoria Thornhill was now presenting. "I have sources saying it was you, that Coal Global is basically the entire foundation of this deal. But that's not what the Thornhills are saying in their press materials." "What are they saying?" "That they secured financial consulting services from various firms. Plural, vague, like you're one vendor among many." Jasmine's eyes were sharp with the instinct that separated real journalists from PR repeaters. "But that's not true, is it?" Avery was quiet for a moment, weighing her response. Then she smiled, a small, precise expression that didn't reach her eyes. "What would you say if I told you that without Coal Global's architecture, this entire merger would collapse within 24 hours? "I'd say that's one hell of a story." Jasmine's hand moved toward her phone. "Can I quote you?" "Not yet." Avery's voice was soft but absolute. "But keep recording. I think tonight is going to be educational for everyone." Before Jasmine could respond, a commotion erupted near the entrance. Raised voices cut through the careful orchestration of the gala's ambient conversation. Avery turned to see a cluster of security personnel surrounding someone, their body language aggressive despite their formal attire. The crowd's attention began to shift, conversations dying as people craned to see what was happening. Then Victoria Thornhill's voice cut through the ballroom like a whip crack. "What on earth is going on over there?" The security cluster parted slightly, and Avery could see who they'd surrounded. A young black woman in a server's uniform stood frozen, her hands raised slightly as if to show she meant no harm. Her face was a mask of humiliation and confusion. Victoria strode across the ballroom, her heels clicking against marble like gunshots. "I asked a question. What is happening?" The head of security, a thick-necked man who'd probably played college football before discovering private protection paid better, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we caught this young woman trying to take photos in the main gallery. When we questioned her, she couldn't provide proper identification." "I work here," the young woman said, her voice shaking. "My name is Keisha Robinson. I was hired for tonight's event. I just stepped away for a moment because my mom called and—" "Your staff?" Victoria's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Then why were you in the family gallery? That area is completely off limits to hired help." "I got turned around. The house is huge, and I've never worked here before, and I was just trying to find my way back to the kitchen when—" "Trying to find your way back or trying to see what you could photograph and sell to tabloids?" Victoria's accusation hung in the air like poison. "We've had problems with staff trying to profit from access to our private spaces. Did you really think we wouldn't notice?" "No, I would never—" Keisha's voice broke. Tears were starting to form in her eyes, visible even from across the room. "I swear I was just lost. Please, I need this job. I didn't do anything wrong." Avery felt something shift in her chest. Not surprise, but recognition. She'd seen this scene before in 1,000 variations. Different settings, different specifics, but always the same fundamental dynamic. Power-crushing vulnerability because it could. She began moving toward the confrontation, her champagne glass still in hand. Victoria wasn't finished. "Lost. How convenient. Tell me, did you get lost with your phone camera already open, or was that just coincidence?" "Mrs. Thornhill, please. I don't think you understand the seriousness of this situation. Victoria's voice rose, ensuring everyone in the ballroom could hear. We trusted you to work in our home and you violated that trust. Security, I want her removed from the property immediately. And make sure to blacklist her from every service company in the area. I won't have thieves and liars infiltrating respectable events. The crowd had formed a circle now, that particular kind of human ring that forms around public humiliation, like wolves around wounded prey. Keisha's tears were flowing freely, her whole body trembling as Victoria's accusations continued to rain down like hammers on glass. I swear on everything, Mrs. Thornhill, I didn't take any pictures. You can check my phone right now. Please, just check it. Keisha held out her phone with shaking hands, but Victoria didn't move to take it. Oh, I'm sure you've already deleted whatever you took, Victoria said, her voice dripping with contempt. Do you think we're stupid? That we don't know how these things work? Avery reached the edge of the circle just as Gregory Thornhill joined his mother, his expression a mixture of irritation and cruel amusement. Mom, just have security handle it. We don't need to make a scene during our event. This girl made the scene when she decided to violate our trust, Victoria snapped back. Then she turned her attention to the other staff members who'd frozen in place around the ballroom, their trays still balanced in their hands. Let this be a lesson to all of you. We treat our staff well, but we do not tolerate theft or deception. When you come into our home, you represent us, and if you can't maintain our standards, there are hundreds of others who will. The threat hung in the air, ensuring that every waiter, every bartender, every person hired to serve would remember this moment and understand their place in the Thornhill universe. Disposable, replaceable, powerless. Avery set her champagne glass down on a nearby table and stepped forward into the circle. Her movement was calm, unhurried, but it drew eyes immediately. In a room full of elaborate gowns and designer suits, her simple ivory dress became a statement of different intentions. Excuse me, Avery said, her voice cutting through Victoria's tirade with surgical precision, but I think there's been a misunderstanding. Victoria turned toward her, irritation flashing across her features. I'm sorry. Who are you? The question landed in the suddenly quiet ballroom with the weight of a revelation. Avery watched Victoria's face, seeing the genuine confusion there. After 18 months of negotiations, after dozens of phone calls and video conferences, after building the entire financial foundation that made this family's celebration possible, Victoria Thornhill had no idea who she was looking at. Avery Cole, she said simply. Cole Global. We've spoken many times, Mrs. Thornhill, though always by phone or video conference. This is our first meeting in person. Victoria's eyes narrowed, clearly searching her memory for context. Recognition flickered but didn't quite catch. The consultant. Yes, Marcus mentioned you'd be here. But I'm afraid this doesn't concern you. This is a private matter regarding our household staff. Actually, Avery said, her tone still perfectly calm, I think it concerns anyone who cares about basic human dignity. She turned toward Keisha, whose tears had slowed as confusion replaced fear. What's your name? Keisha. Keisha Robinson. Keisha, may I see your phone? Keisha handed it over without hesitation, her hands still trembling. Avery took it and turned to Victoria. You accused her of taking photographs. Let's verify that together, shall we? She navigated to the photo gallery, turning the screen so both Victoria and the watching crowd could see. The most recent photos were from 3 days ago. Selfies with friends, a picture of a textbook, a screenshot of a work schedule. No photos from tonight, Avery said. No deleted items in the trash folder either, as you can see. Just a young woman trying to do her job who made the mistake of getting lost in a house the size of a small hotel. Victoria's face flushed. That doesn't prove anything. She could have what? Avery's voice remained level, but something harder entered it now. Could have used her magical powers to delete photos in a way that leaves no trace? Or could have been telling the truth from the beginning while you chose not to believe her because it felt better to assume the worst? Now wait just a minute. Gregory stepped forward, his earlier amusement replaced by indignation. You don't get to come into our home and tell us how to handle our staff. I don't care what consulting work you did. You're a guest here, and guests don't interfere with family business. You're absolutely right, Avery said. Guests shouldn't interfere. But then again, I'm not actually a guest, am I? I'm the architect of the entire deal you're celebrating tonight. The financial structures, the funding mechanisms, the international investment partnerships, all of it came from my company. So perhaps we should reconsider who belongs at this celebration and who's here on borrowed credibility. The ballroom had gone completely silent now. Even the ambient music from the string quartet seemed to have faded, though Avery suspected they were simply drowned out by the collective held breath of 300 people sensing that something significant was unfolding. Charles Thornhill descended from the stage area, his authoritative presence cutting through the crowd like a ship through water. "What's going on here? Victoria? Gregory? What is this commotion?" "Dad, this woman is causing a disruption," Gregory said quickly. "She's defending an employee who was caught in a restricted area, and now she's making wild claims about her importance to our merger." Charles's eyes moved to Avery, and for the first time that evening, she saw something other than dismissal in a Thornhill family member's gaze. There was calculation there, a sharper intelligence than his children possessed. Cole. Avery Cole. "Yes, I know who you are. Your firm did excellent work on the financial models." "Cole Global doesn't do work on anything, Mr. Thornhill. We create foundations. Without our architecture, your merger is just two families with expensive dreams and no way to achieve them." Avery's voice remained calm, but each word landed with increasing weight. "And right now, at this celebration of a deal that exists solely because of my company's expertise, I just watched your family publicly humiliate a young woman for the crime of getting lost in your mansion. So perhaps before we continue discussing business, we should address basic human decency." Charles's jaw tightened. The room was watching him now, waiting to see how the patriarch would handle this unexpected challenge to his authority. Around the circle, Avery could see phones emerging from pockets and purses. The recording had begun. Whatever happened next would have witnesses far beyond this ballroom. "Ms. Cole," Charles said, his voice carefully controlled, "I appreciate your passion for justice, but you're overstepping. This is a household matter. The girl violated protocols, and we're addressing it appropriately." By blacklisting her from every employment opportunity in the area? By calling her a thief and liar in front of 300 people without a shred of evidence? That's your version of appropriate? Avery turned to address the wider crowd now, her voice carrying to every corner of the ballroom. "This young woman was accused of taking photographs. I've shown you her phone. There are no photographs. She was accused of lying about being lost. Has anyone here never gotten turned around in an unfamiliar building? Has anyone here never made a simple mistake?" Silence. But Avery could see shifting expressions, people reconsidering what they'd just witnessed. "The only thing Keisha did wrong tonight was being vulnerable enough to crush," Avery continued. "And the only thing your family demonstrated was that power without accountability becomes cruelty." "That is enough." Victoria's voice cracked like ice breaking. "Security, I want this woman removed from the property. Now." The security team hesitated, looking between Victoria and Charles, uncertain whose authority to follow in this suddenly complicated situation. Charles raised a hand to stop them, his expression darkening. "Ms. Cole, you should leave. Voluntarily, before this becomes more unpleasant than it needs to be." "I agree," Avery said, reaching into her clutch. "This has already become far more unpleasant than necessary. But before I go, there's something you all should understand." She pulled out her phone and made a call. It connected on the first ring. "Marcus, it's time. Execute Contingency Protocol 7. She could hear Marcus's sharp intake of breath on the other end. "Are you certain? Once we start, there's no walking this back." "I'm certain. 7 across the board. Full implementation." "Understood. Executing now." Avery ended the call and looked at Charles, whose expression had shifted from anger to uncertainty. "What did you just do?" "I made a phone call," Avery said simply. "Just like you did 18 months ago when you first contacted Cole Global to explore funding possibilities for your merger." "Do you remember that conversation, Mr. Thornhill? You told me that your family had the vision and legacy, but you needed someone who understood how to structure the kind of complex international financing that could make it real. You said you needed someone who could navigate the regulatory frameworks in 12 different countries, someone who could coordinate investment partnerships across 4 continents, someone who could build something so sophisticated that your competitors wouldn't even understand how you'd accomplished it." Charles said nothing. but his silence was confirmation enough. I built that for you, Avery continued. Every funding stream, every regulatory workaround, every investment vehicle that makes your $900 million merger possible. I created it, not as a consultant, not as a vendor, as the singular architect of the entire financial structure. And do you know what I built into that architecture, Mr. Thornhill? Something you never thought to ask about. What? The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Reversibility. The word hung in the air like a bomb waiting to detonate. Around the ballroom, the more financially sophisticated guests were beginning to understand what that meant. Avery could see it in their faces, the dawning horror of people realizing they were watching a controlled demolition in real time. The funding mechanisms I created are interlocked, Avery explained, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. They depend on a series of partnership agreements that I personally negotiated with investment groups in London, Singapore, Dubai, Toronto, and Sao Paulo. Those groups invested specifically because they trusted Cole Global's analysis and recommendations. Their contracts include provisions that allow them to withdraw if certain conditions aren't met, conditions like maintaining the integrity of the financial architecture or adhering to the ethical standards that my company requires from partners. Victoria's face had gone pale. You can't be serious. I'm always serious about contracts, Mrs. Thornhill. It's why people trust me to handle billions of dollars in international finance. Avery turned back to Charles. The call I just made activated withdrawal protocols. Within the next 60 seconds, every major investment partner in your merger will receive notification that Cole Global is terminating its involvement in the Ashford-Thornhill transaction due to irreconcilable differences in values and business practices. You can't do that, Gregory burst out. We have contracts, legal obligations. You can't just walk away from a deal this size. Actually, I can. The contracts include termination clauses that I wrote specifically to allow exactly this scenario. You never read them carefully enough to understand what you were signing. Avery's expression remained neutral, but her eyes were diamond hard. Cole Global has a reputation for working only with partners who meet our standards. Tonight, you failed to meet those standards. The consequences are built into the agreements you signed. Charles grabbed his own phone, his fingers moving frantically across the screen. Around the ballroom, other phones were beginning to buzz and chime. Notification sounds rippled through the crowd like electronic rainfall. Avery watched as faces changed, as people read messages that confirmed what she'd just told them. Catherine Ashford pushed through the crowd, her silver gown now seeming less like armor and more like costume jewelry. This is insane. You can't destroy a $900 million merger because we disciplined an employee. I'm not destroying anything, Avery corrected. I'm withdrawing my company's participation from a partnership with people who have demonstrated they're not worthy of it. What happens to your merger after that is your problem, not mine. Charles was talking urgently into his phone now, his voice rising despite obvious attempts to maintain composure. What do you mean the Tokyo Group is pulling out? They can't just... When did they... No, you need to call them back right now and... He stopped, listening to something that drained the color from his face. How many? Avery didn't need to hear the other side of that conversation. She'd designed this system 18 months ago, building in fail-safes and exit ramps that the Thornhills had never imagined would be used. The international investment consortiums weren't just pulling out because Cole Global was withdrawing. They were pulling out because the contract specified that Cole Global's continued involvement was a material condition of their participation. Without her company's architecture, the entire deal became exactly what she'd said, expensive dreams with no foundation. Stop this! Victoria's voice had lost its earlier authority, replaced by something closer to panic. You're being irrational, emotional. We can discuss this like reasonable people. I am being perfectly reasonable, Avery said. I'm making a business decision based on observed behavior. You demonstrated tonight that your family views people as disposable when they're vulnerable, that you wield power without accountability, and that you're willing to destroy someone's reputation and livelihood over nothing more than your own assumptions. Those aren't the values I want associated with Cole Global, so I'm disassociating. Jasmine Wu had moved closer during the exchange, her phone held up in recording mode. When she caught Avery's eye, the reporter mouthed two words. Holy shit. Gregory had joined his father now, both of them frantically making calls while their expressions grew increasingly desperate. Around them, other guests were having urgent conversations, some stepping away from the Thornhills and Ashfords as if proximity to them might be contagious. The social geometry of the ballroom was reorganizing in real time, power structures shifting as people recalculated who mattered and who didn't. Ms. Cole. An older gentleman in an expensive suit approached carefully, his badge identifying him as Richard Morrison, senior partner at Morrison & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious law firms. I apologize for interrupting, but I wanted to express my appreciation for what you just did. I've represented Cole Global in several transactions, and I've always admired your firm's integrity. Tonight, you proved that integrity isn't just marketing language. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. Avery's voice was warmer now, though her attention remained on the Thornhills. If you need legal support navigating the dissolution of this partnership, my firm would be honored to assist. No charge. I appreciate that, but Cole Global's legal team is already handling the technical elements. What I need from witnesses like you is documentation. If you could provide a written statement of what you observed tonight, particularly regarding the treatment of Ms. Robinson, it would be helpful for the record. Consider it done. Morrison turned toward Keisha, who'd been standing frozen throughout the entire exchange, her face a mask of shock. Ms. Robinson, I'd like to offer you my card as well. If the Thornhills attempt to follow through on their blacklisting threats, please contact my office immediately. What they threatened constitutes tortious interference with business relationships, and we'd be happy to represent you pro bono. Keisha took the card with trembling hands, unable to form words. Tears were flowing again, but these were different. Not humiliation, but something closer to overwhelmed relief. Charles had finished his call and turned back to Avery, his face now a mottled red. You're making a mistake. A catastrophic mistake. Cole Global's reputation will be destroyed when word gets out that you sabotaged a major deal over something this trivial. Trivial? Avery let the word settle. You think human dignity is trivial? That's exactly why I'm making this decision. No, that's not what I meant. Charles was backpedaling now, his authority crumbling. Listen, we can work this out. Whatever you need, whatever assurances you want, we can provide them. But you need to stop this before it's too late. It was too late the moment your wife called Keisha a thief and liar without evidence, Avery said. It was too late when your son said I didn't belong at a celebration for a deal that only exists because of my work. It was too late when every single person at this party assumed I was staff instead of the reason they were here. She gestured around the ballroom. All of this? The gala, the presentations, the celebration of your family's brilliant achievement, it was built on a foundation you never bothered to see because you were too comfortable assuming you built it yourselves. Victoria made one more attempt, her voice taking on a pleading quality that probably hadn't been there in decades. Ms. Cole, please, think about the jobs this merger will create, the clean energy infrastructure we could build together, the positive impact on climate change mitigation. Are you really willing to sacrifice all of that because of a misunderstanding with an employee? Those things matter, Avery acknowledged, which is why I'm not abandoning the merger structure. I'm redirecting it. Charles's eyes widened. Redirecting it where? To your competitors. Avery pulled up an email on her phone and showed him the screen. While you've been making phone calls, I've been finalizing an agreement with Meridian Energy Group. They've been trying to break into renewable infrastructure for years, but lack the financial architecture to compete with your merger. As of 10 minutes ago, they have everything. The same funding streams, the same international partnerships, the same regulatory frameworks. The only thing that's changed is whose name is on the contracts. The implications rippled through the crowd like a shockwave. Meridian Energy Group wasn't just a competitor. They were the Ashford-Thornhill merger's primary rival, the one company that could potentially dominate the renewable energy market if they had the resources. And Avery had just handed them those resources on a silver platter. That's industrial espionage, Gregory shouted. You can't just transfer proprietary deal structures to our competitors. We'll sue you into oblivion. Please do, Avery said mildly. I look forward to discovery, where your lawyers will have to explain to a judge that you're suing me for redirecting structures I created, using relationships I built, for companies I personally negotiated with because you wanted to own my work despite treating me like hired help. Good luck with that? Catherine Ashford had gone completely silent, her face frozen in an expression somewhere between rage and shock. She'd built her family's technology patents over decades, positioning them perfectly for this moment of market dominance. And now she was watching that moment evaporate like morning fog under harsh sun. The beauty of the system I built, Avery continued, addressing the room now, rather than just the families, is that it was never actually dependent on the Ashfords or Thornhills. It was dependent on the quality of the underlying assets, the patents, the technology, the infrastructure possibilities. Those things can be partnered with anyone who has the vision to use them properly. Meridian has that vision. And unlike your families, they've never mistaken me for the help. Around the ballroom, the social reorganization was accelerating. People were edging toward the exits now, clearly uncomfortable about being associated with what was increasingly looking like a spectacular failure rather than a triumphant celebration. The Thornhills and Ashfords were becoming pariahs in their own ballroom, isolated by the very public nature of their collapse. Jasmine Wu stepped forward, her phone still recording. Ms. Cole, for the record, are you saying that the entire Ashford-Thornhill merger is dead as of tonight? I'm saying that the financial architecture that made it possible is no longer available to them, Avery clarified. Whether they can salvage something from the wreckage is their business. But the deal they were celebrating tonight, the $900 million renewable energy conglomerate built on coal global structures, that deal is finished. And Meridian Energy Group is getting everything? They're getting the opportunity to build something meaningful with partners who understand that excellence isn't measured by how many people you step on while climbing. Whether they succeed with that opportunity depends on them. Charles made one final attempt, his voice dropping to something almost like genuine emotion. Avery, Ms. Cole, please. My family has built its reputation over 4 generations. This will destroy us, not just financially, but socially, professionally, everything we've worked for. Avery looked at him for a long moment, seeing past the patriarch to the man who'd made comfortable assumptions about power and worth, and who belonged in which spaces. She thought about all the times in her career she'd been mistaken for someone's assistant, someone's diversity hire, someone who couldn't possibly be the person actually running things. She thought about Keisha, whose only crime had been being vulnerable at the wrong moment in the wrong place. Mr. Thornhill, she said quietly, 4 generations of building a reputation, and tonight you spent it all on cruelty disguised as authority. That wasn't my choice. It was yours. She turned to Keisha, whose tears had finally stopped. Ms. Robinson, would you like a ride home? I think we've both had enough of this party. Keisha nodded, still unable to speak. Avery offered her arm, and the young woman took it gratefully. Together they walked toward the ballroom exit, their departure creating a path through the crowd that closed behind them like water. Behind them, the sound of ringing phones continued. Notifications kept arriving, each one another piece of the Thornhill-Ashford empire crumbling in real time. Investors pulling out, partners withdrawing, opportunities evaporating. The celebration had become a wake, the triumphant announcement transformed into a public execution of reputation and power. As they reached the exit, Avery heard Victoria's voice rise one last time. This isn't over. You can't just walk away after destroying everything we built. Avery paused in the doorway and looked back. The Thornhills and Ashfords stood in the center of their emptying ballroom, surrounded by the debris of their assumed superiority. Around them, guests were fleeing, phones were buzzing, and the careful architecture of their social and professional dominance was collapsing like a house built on sand. You're right, Avery called back. I didn't destroy what you built. I withdrew what I built. There's a difference. And that difference is something you should have understood before you invited me to your party and then treated me like I didn't belong here. She paused, letting her next words carry across the ruined celebration. I didn't belong here. I was always too good for this room. I just needed you to remind me of that. Then she walked out into the night, leaving the Thornhills to contemplate the true cost of their assumptions. The air outside felt different than when Avery had arrived hours earlier. Cooler, cleaner, as if the world itself had been washed of something toxic. Her driver materialized immediately, opening the car door with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to read his employer's moods without needing explanation. He took one look at Keisha's tear-stained face and Avery's controlled calm and understood that questions could wait. Keisha settled into the leather seat beside Avery, her whole body still trembling with aftershock. For several minutes, neither woman spoke as the car pulled away from the Thornhill estate, the mansion's lights receding behind them like a dying star. Finally, Keisha found her voice. "I don't understand what just happened. Any of it." Her words came out in a rush, years of held-back emotion suddenly finding release. "One minute I was being accused of stealing, thinking I was about to lose everything, and the next you were there, and then you were making phone calls, and then you were telling them you destroyed their merger, and I don't understand." Avery turned to look at her properly for the first time since they'd left. Keisha was younger than she'd initially appeared, maybe 23 or 24, with the kind of exhausted determination in her eyes that came from working multiple jobs while trying to build something better. Avery recognized it because she'd worn that same expression for years before Cole Global had become what it was now. "What you witnessed," Avery said carefully, "was what happens when people mistake power for immunity. The Thornhills believed they could treat you the way they did because they assumed there would be no consequences. They were wrong. But you lost money, right? Like a lot of money? To help me?" Keisha's voice cracked. "I'm nobody. I'm just a girl trying to pay for community college who took a catering job because it paid better than my regular shifts. Why would you do that for me?" "Because you're not nobody," Avery said firmly, "and because the money was never the point. Power without accountability becomes cruelty, and I refuse to be complicit in that. Not in my business, not in my partnerships, and definitely not when I'm standing there watching it happen to someone who deserves better." Keisha wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "My mom always says that rich people don't become rich by caring about people like us. She says the system's designed to keep us down and them up, and the best we can do is survive it without getting crushed, but you're rich, and you just blew up your own deal to defend me. I don't know how to process that." "Your mother isn't wrong about the system," Avery acknowledged. "It is designed to maintain hierarchies, to keep certain people visible and others invisible. But individual people still make individual choices about whether they reinforce that system or challenge it. Tonight I chose to challenge it. That doesn't make me a hero. It makes me someone who refuses to pretend that profits matter more than principles." The car moved through Chicago's streets, passing from wealthy suburbs into neighborhoods where the buildings grew closer together and the streetlights flickered with less reliable electricity. Keisha gave the driver her address, an apartment complex in a neighborhood that Avery recognized as one where people worked 3 jobs to afford one-bedroom units they shared with extended family. "What happens now?" Keisha asked. "To them, I mean. The Thornhills. Did you really destroy their merger, or was that just, I don't know, a threat to scare them?" "It's done," Avery said. "By morning, every major business publication will be running stories about the collapse of the Ashford-Thornhill merger. The Thornhills will try to salvage it, but without the financial architecture Cole Global provided, they're just 2 families with expensive dreams and no way to achieve them. Their investors will scatter, their partners will distance themselves, and their reputation as deal-makers will be permanently damaged." "Good." The word came out with surprising venom. Keisha seemed shocked by her own intensity, but she didn't take it back. "I know that's probably wrong to say, but good. They were going to blacklist me, ruin my life over nothing, and they didn't even care. At least now they'll know what it feels like to have someone more powerful than them decide their future doesn't matter." Avery smiled slightly. "It's not wrong to want accountability. Justice isn't always pretty, and it's not always proportional. Sometimes it's just the universe correcting an imbalance." The car pulled up outside Keisha's building, a tired structure with laundry hanging from balconies and children's toys scattered in the small courtyard. Before Keisha could exit, Avery pulled out her phone and typed quickly. "I'm sending you contact information for 3 people," Avery said. "The first is Richard Morrison, the attorney you met tonight. If the Thornhills or their associates try to follow through on any of their threats, contact him immediately. He's serious about representing you pro bono. The second is my executive assistant, Marcus Chen. I've instructed him to connect you with our HR department. Cole Global has an internship program for people pursuing business or finance degrees. If you're interested, there's a position available. Keisha's eyes widened. You're offering me a job? After what happened tonight? I'm offering you an opportunity, Avery corrected. What you do with it is up to you, but I saw how you handled yourself in that ballroom. You were terrified, humiliated, and overwhelmed, and you still told the truth when it would have been easier to just apologize and disappear. That kind of integrity under pressure is exactly what I look for in people I want on my team. I don't even know what to say. Keisha's voice was barely above a whisper. Say you'll think about it. And Keisha? Avery waited until the young woman met her eyes. What happened tonight wasn't your fault. Not the accusations, not the humiliation, none of it. You were targeted because you were vulnerable and they had power. Remember that when you're tempted to blame yourself. Remember that the problem was never you. Keisha nodded, tears flowing again, but these were the cleansing kind. She climbed out of the car and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back through the window at Avery. Then she mouthed 2 words, "Thank you," and disappeared into her building. The car pulled away and Avery's phone immediately began buzzing with incoming calls and messages. She ignored them all except one from Marcus. "Status report," she said as soon as he answered. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled excitement. Protocol 7 is fully executed. All major investment partners have withdrawn from the Ashford-Thornhill merger, citing material changes in partnership conditions. Meridian Energy Group has confirmed receipt of the transfer package and is already mobilizing their legal team to finalize the partnership agreements. The Thornhills have been trying to reach you for the last 20 minutes. Charles called my personal cell demanding I override your instructions. Which you didn't. Which I didn't. I explained that Cole Global's CEO makes final decisions about partnership dissolution and that his window for negotiation closed when he ordered you removed from the property. Marcus paused. Avery, the business media has already picked up the story. Jasmine Wu published a preliminary piece online 40 minutes ago. It's spreading fast. What's the angle? Billionaire families lose $900 million merger after racist treatment of black CEO. She's using footage from the ballroom, quotes from witnesses, and financial analysis showing how the entire deal was dependent on your architecture. The response has been significant. Avery leaned back in her seat, processing. Define significant. 60,000 shares in the first 30 minutes. Major business publications are reaching out for comment. 3 different investors who weren't involved in the original deal have contacted me asking if Cole Global is taking new clients. And the hashtag consequences have consequences is trending in finance circles on social media. Consequences have consequences, Avery repeated, tasting the phrase. I like that. What about legal exposure? Are the Thornhills mobilizing for litigation? Their lawyers sent a cease and desist letter threatening to sue for breach of contract and tortious interference. I forwarded it to our legal team. They're drafting a response that essentially says, read the termination clauses you signed and get back to us when you understand them. Marcus's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Avery, I've worked for you for 6 years. I've seen you navigate impossible deals, outmaneuver competitors who underestimated you, and build a company that's reshaped international finance. But tonight was different. How so? Tonight you reminded everyone that power doesn't just come from money or connections or old family names. It comes from being the person everyone else needs but no one bothers to see until it's too late. He paused. The Thornhills had no idea they were standing on a foundation you built. They thought they were the architects when they were really just tourists in a structure you created. And when they revealed who they really were, you pulled the foundation out from under them and walked away. That's not just business strategy. That's art. Avery smiled into the darkness of the car. Art requires an audience, Marcus. Make sure Jasmine Wu gets access to the full contract documentation. I want people to understand exactly how thoroughly the Thornhills failed to read what they were signing. Transparency serves us better than secrecy right now. Already done. I sent her the relevant sections with our legal team's blessing. She's working on a follow-up piece breaking down the financial architecture and how the termination clauses were structured to give you complete control over dissolution terms. Good. What about Meridian? Thrill doesn't begin to cover it. Their CEO called me personally to say this is the opportunity they've been waiting for. They want to schedule a meeting with you first thing Monday morning to discuss implementation timeline and partnership protocols. They're also asking if you'd consider a more permanent advisory role beyond just the initial structure. Tell them I'll consider it after we see how they handle the transition. I want to know if they're serious about building something meaningful, or if they just want to capitalize on the Thornhill's failure. Avery checked the time. It was approaching midnight. Anything else I need to know tonight? Catherine Ashford tried to reach you directly. She sent an email to your personal address asking for a private meeting to discuss salvaging the working relationship. Marcus's tone made clear what he thought of that request. Forward it to legal with a note that Cole Global doesn't salvage relationships with partners who demonstrate fundamental values misalignment. We're not a repair service for people who need to learn basic human decency. Done. And Avery? For what it's worth, I'm proud to work for someone who's willing to blow up a $900 million deal to defend a young woman she'd never met before tonight. A lot of people in your position would have made different calculations. A lot of people in my position wouldn't be in my position if they made those calculations, Avery said. Power is only meaningful if you're willing to use it for something other than accumulation. Tonight was a reminder of that, for me as much as for anyone else. She ended the call and stared out the window at Chicago passing by in streaks of light and shadow. The city looked different now, or maybe she was seeing it differently. Every lit window represented people making choices about who they were and what they valued, whether they realized it or not. The Thornhills had made their choice. Avery had made hers. And by morning, the entire business world would be discussing the consequences of both. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Diana, her partner, calling from their home in Lincoln Park. I saw the news, Diana said as soon as Avery answered. Jasmine Wu's article is everywhere. Are you okay? I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. You just destroyed a merger you spent 18 months building. That's not usually something people categorize as better than fine. Diana's voice carried concern wrapped in understanding. What happened? Avery gave her the abbreviated version, hitting the key moments without dwelling on details. Diana listened without interrupting, her artist's sensibility recognizing the emotional architecture beneath the business decisions. So you walked away from $900 million to defend a catering server, Diana said when Avery finished, and transferred the entire deal structure to the Thornhills' biggest competitor. That's the summary, yes. Good. Diana's response was immediate and fierce. I'm glad. I know that probably sounds strange from a business perspective, but I'm glad. You've told me stories about how you were treated when you were building Cole Global, how many rooms you walked into where people assumed you were there to serve coffee instead of lid meetings. I always wondered what would happen if you had the chance to actually do something about it instead of just enduring it. Now I know. Does it bother you? Avery asked. The money, I mean. We could have personally profited significantly from that deal's success. We have enough money, Diana said simply. What we need more of in this world is people who remember what it's like to be dismissed and invisible, who reach positions of power and choose not to perpetuate the same systems that tried to keep them down. You did that tonight. That matters more than any amount of money. Avery felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was tight. I keep thinking about her face, Keisha's face. She looked exactly how I felt 20 years ago when I was trying to break into finance, and people kept assuming I was the administrative assistant instead of the analyst with 2 degrees and a better understanding of derivatives than anyone in the room, terrified, humiliated, certain that the system was going to crush her and there was nothing she could do about it. But you did something about it, Diana said. For her and for yourself. That's not a small thing, Avery. That's transformative. They talked for a few more minutes before Avery ended the call, promising she'd be home within the hour. The car was approaching downtown now, the city's heart where Cole Global's offices occupied 3 floors of a building Avery had purchased outright 5 years earlier. She'd built an empire here, brick by brick, deal by deal, proving wrong every person who'd ever underestimated her because of how she looked or where she came from. But tonight felt different from those victories. Tonight wasn't about proving herself. It was about defending someone else, using power not to accumulate more power but to create accountability where none had existed. That distinction mattered in ways she was still processing. Her phone lit up with a new email. The sender was an address she didn't recognize, but the subject line caught her attention. From a former Thornhill employee. Avery opened it. Miss Cole, you don't know me, but I worked for the Thornhill family for 3 years as a personal assistant to Victoria Thornhill. I was let go 6 months ago under circumstances similar to what I saw happen to Keisha Robinson tonight. Accused of something I didn't do, humiliated publicly, blacklisted from other positions through the Thornhill's connections. I thought I was the only one. I thought it was somehow my fault. But watching what you did tonight, seeing you defend that young woman and hold them accountable for their cruelty, I realized I wasn't alone, and it wasn't my fault. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I wanted you to know that what you did matters. It matters to people like me who've been crushed by powerful families and told to be grateful for the experience. Thank you for reminding us that power can be challenged and cruelty doesn't have to be endured. You're a hero to more people than you'll ever know. The email was unsigned, sent from a burner address that couldn't be traced back to any individual, but its authenticity was unmistakable. Avery read it twice, then forwarded it to Marcus with a simple instruction. Start a file. I suspect this won't be the only one. Within minutes, Marcus confirmed her suspicion. We're receiving emails, lots of them. Former employees, people who've had negative experiences with the Thornhill and Ashford families. Workers from other wealthy estates who've witnessed similar treatment. It's like tonight opened a floodgate. How many? 17 in the last 10 minutes, and growing. Avery stared at her phone screen, watching the number of unread messages climb. Each one represented a person who'd been hurt, dismissed, humiliated by people who believed their wealth made them immune to consequences. Each one was a testament to the system Diana had mentioned, the one designed to keep certain people visible and others invisible, certain voices amplified and others silenced. Marcus, set up a dedicated email address for people to share their experiences with the Thornhill and Ashford families. Partner with employment law firms who do pro bono work. If there are patterns of illegal behavior, I want them documented and addressed. Avery's voice was steady, but something fierce was building behind it. Tonight wasn't just about one deal or one act of cruelty. It was about a system that enables that cruelty. If we're going to challenge it, let's challenge it comprehensively. Understood. I'll have it operational by morning. Marcus paused. Avery, you realize this is going to make you a target, right? The Thornhills and Ashfords aren't the only wealthy families who treat people the way they did tonight. If you position yourself as someone who holds them accountable, you're declaring war on an entire social class. Then I'm declaring war, Avery said simply. Because the alternative is watching people like Keisha get crushed by people like the Thornhills and pretending it's not my problem. I'm not willing to do that anymore. The car pulled up outside her building, a converted warehouse in a neighborhood that had transformed from industrial decay to upscale urban living over the past decade. Avery had bought the entire building when it was still decay, seeing potential where others saw blight. Now it was worth 10 times what she'd paid, but she'd never considered selling. It represented something more valuable than profit. It represented vision that others couldn't see. She rode the private elevator to her penthouse, the city spreading out below her through floor-to-ceiling windows that she'd had installed during renovation. Chicago at night looked like a promise, light stretching toward horizons that suggested infinite possibility if you were brave enough to reach for it. Diana was waiting in the living room, a glass of wine already poured for each of them. She handed one to Avery without speaking, understanding that sometimes silence was the best response to seismic events. They stood together at the window, looking out at the city that had witnessed Avery's transformation from ambitious analyst to industry powerhouse. What are you thinking? Diana finally asked. I'm thinking about all the rooms I've walked into where people assumed I didn't belong, Avery said slowly. All the meetings where I had to prove myself twice as hard to receive half the recognition. All the times I was mistaken for support staff, for someone's assistant, for anything other than what I actually was. And I'm thinking about how I built Cole Global, partly to prove those people wrong, partly to create something where I wouldn't have to constantly justify my presence. And I realize now that wasn't enough. Building my own empire, achieving my own success, it matters. But it's not sufficient. Because every day, somewhere, there's another Keisha being humiliated by another Thornhill family. Another person being told they don't belong, they aren't enough. They should be grateful for whatever scraps of dignity the powerful choose to offer them. I can't stop all of that. but I can use what I've built to challenge it when I see it. I can make it expensive to treat people as disposable. Diana moved closer, her hand finding Avery's. So tonight wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. Tonight was both, Avery said. The end of my willingness to ignore systemic cruelty for the sake of business relationships, and the beginning of using Cole Global's resources to create consequences for people who believe power exempts them from basic human decency. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe and pulse below them. Somewhere out there, the Thornhills were making frantic calls, trying to salvage what remained of their reputation and business prospects. Somewhere, Keisha was processing the strangest night of her life, hopefully beginning to understand that what happened wasn't her fault. Somewhere, Meridian Energy Group's leadership was celebrating an opportunity they'd never expected to receive. And somewhere, in newsrooms and boardrooms and living rooms across the country, people were reading about what happened at the Thornhill Estate Gala and reconsidering their assumptions about power, accountability, and what happened when you underestimated the wrong person. Avery's phone buzzed one more time. Another email to the dedicated address Marcus had set up. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. Stories pouring in from people who'd been invisible for too long, who'd endured cruelty from the powerful and been told to accept it as the price of survival. She thought about responding to each one individually, but realized that would be impossible. The volume was already overwhelming, and it was only going to grow as word spread. Instead, she drafted a single message and had Marcus post it publicly on Cole Global's official channels. To everyone who has shared their story tonight, I see you. Your experiences matter. Your dignity matters. What happened to you was not acceptable, and it was not your fault. In the coming weeks, Cole Global will be launching initiatives to support workers who've faced discrimination, harassment, or abuse from employers who believed their wealth made them immune to consequences. We will partner with legal organizations, advocacy groups, and anyone else committed to creating accountability in spaces where it hasn't existed before. Power without accountability becomes cruelty. We're going to change that equation, together. She posted it and set her phone down, knowing that by morning the responses would number in the thousands. This was bigger than she'd initially understood. The Thornhill Gala wasn't just one family's downfall. It was a catalyst, a moment when something that had been simmering beneath the surface of public consciousness finally boiled over into visibility. No going back now, Diana observed, reading the post over Avery's shoulder. No, Avery agreed. No going back. Only forward. She finished her wine and walked to her home office, Diana trailing behind with understanding silence. There was work to be done, and morning would come faster than the Thornhills wanted it to. By 3 in the morning, Avery had read through 247 emails from people whose stories echoed Keisha's in heartbreaking variations. A housekeeper fired for asking about overtime pay. A chauffeur blacklisted for witnessing domestic violence and suggesting the family seek help. A nanny dismissed without severance after refusing to work 18-hour days without breaks. The pattern was suffocating in its consistency. Wealthy families wielding power like weapons against people whose only crime was vulnerability. Marcus called it 6, his voice fueled by coffee and righteous momentum. The story has gone international. BBC, Al Jazeera, financial publications in Tokyo and London. Everyone wants a statement from you about the collapse and the broader implications. And Avery? The Thornhills released their own statement an hour ago. Let me guess, Avery said, pulling up her laptop. They're the victims of a vindictive consultant who sabotaged a historic business achievement over a minor staff discipline issue. Close. They're calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding exploited by an outside contractor who failed to honor contractual commitments. They're positioning you as unreliable and emotional, suggesting that Cole Global can't be trusted with major transactions if you're willing to destroy deals over personal grievances. Avery laughed, the sound sharp and utterly without humor. Bold strategy. Let's see how it works when their own signed contracts prove they're lying. She pulled up the termination clause documentation and forwarded it to Marcus. Release this to every major publication with a simple statement. Cole Global's termination of the Ashford-Thornhill partnership was executed in strict accordance with contractual provisions both families reviewed and signed. We encourage anyone questioning the legitimacy of this action to read Section 12, subsection 4, which explicitly permits dissolution under circumstances including fundamental values misalignment. The Thornhill family's characterization of our actions as contractual violation demonstrates either deliberate misrepresentation or stunning failure to understand their own agreements. We'll let the public decide which is more concerning. Brutal, Marcus said with audible satisfaction. I love it. Sending now. What about Meridian? Are they getting cold feet with all the media attention? Opposite. Their CEO wants to accelerate the timeline. She sees this as an opportunity to position Meridian as a company that prioritizes integrity over convenience. She's already drafting public statements about how proud they are to partner with Coal Global, and how this situation demonstrates exactly the kind of values-driven leadership the renewable energy sector needs. Avery felt something settle in her chest, validation that she'd made the right calculation. Schedule a meeting for Monday morning. I want their entire executive team there, and I want to be clear about expectations. This isn't just a business transaction anymore. It's a statement about what kind of companies deserve to shape the future of sustainable energy. She ended the call and found Diana in the kitchen, making breakfast with the focused attention she brought to all creative acts. Eggs, toast, fresh fruit arranged with an artist's eye for composition. They ate in silence, the morning sun streaming through windows that transformed the penthouse into a sanctuary of light. You haven't slept, Diana observed. Sleep can wait. There are 400 emails now, and every one of them represents someone who thought they were alone until last night. I can't ignore that. You also can't personally respond to 400 people while running a multinational financial company and restructuring a $900 million deal. Diana's voice was gentle but firm. You're going to need help. Real help. Infrastructure that can handle what you're building. Avery knew she was right. What had started as a single act of accountability was transforming into something larger, something that required resources and planning beyond her individual capacity. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. The first was to Jennifer Hassan, a former labor rights attorney who'd transitioned to nonprofit work after winning a landmark case against a hotel chain for systemic wage theft. Jennifer answered on the second ring, her voice bright with morning energy that Avery envied. Avery Cole, I was wondering when I'd hear from you after seeing what you did to the Thornhills last night. Jennifer, I need your expertise. I'm setting up a program to support workers who've faced abuse or discrimination from wealthy employers. Legal assistance, documentation support, connections to advocacy organizations. Can Coal Global partner with your foundation? Can we? Jennifer laughed. Avery, we've been trying to tackle this problem for years with a fraction of the resources we need. If you're serious about bringing Coal Global's infrastructure to bear on this issue, we'll clear our calendar. When do you want to start? Today. I'm sending you access to a dedicated email account where people are sharing their stories. I need you to triage them, identify cases with legal merit, and start building documentation. Anything that rises to the level of criminal behavior gets referred to appropriate authorities. Everything else gets assessed for civil action or regulatory complaint. You realize this is going to make you incredibly unpopular with a significant portion of the wealth class, Jennifer said carefully. These families protect each other. They'll close ranks. Let them. I'm not looking to make friends with people who treat workers as disposable. I'm looking to create accountability where it hasn't existed. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried an emotion Avery couldn't quite identify. My mother cleaned houses for families like the Thornhills for 30 years. She came home every night exhausted, sometimes crying, always grateful she hadn't been fired for some imagined slight. She died at 62, worn down by decades of being invisible to people she saw every day. What you're doing, it won't bring her back, but it might mean other mothers don't have to live that way. I'm in. Completely. They talked for another 20 minutes, establishing frameworks and protocols. By the time Avery ended the call, Jennifer had already assembled a team of attorneys willing to work pro bono on cases that met specific criteria. The infrastructure was taking shape. The second call was to David Chen, Marcus's brother, and a public relations strategist whose firm specialized in crisis management and reputation rehabilitation. David had helped Coal Global navigate several difficult situations over the years, including a hostile takeover attempt and a smear campaign from a competitor who'd failed to outbid them on a major contract. David, I need you to manage something that's going to get significantly worse before it gets better. The Thornhill situation, David said immediately. I've been watching it unfold. Avery, I'm going to be direct with you. From a pure PR perspective, this is dangerous territory. You're positioning yourself against people with enormous resources and long memories. They will come after you professionally, personally, however they can. Are you prepared for that? I am. But I need someone who can help me control the narrative and make sure the focus stays on accountability rather than personalities. That's going to be difficult. The Thornhills are already trying to make this about you being unstable or emotional. Classic playbook. Discredit the challenger rather than address the behavior. Then we need to make it impossible to ignore the behavior. I want a comprehensive media strategy that centers worker testimonies, legal documentation, and pattern analysis. Make it about systemic issues rather than individual incidents. Force the conversation to be about accountability structures rather than whether I overreacted. David was silent for a long moment, and Avery could practically hear him calculating angles and approaches. That could work, but it requires you to be willing to share very personal stories from people who've been victimized. They'll need to go public, which means opening themselves up to retaliation and scrutiny. Are you confident they'll be willing to do that? I think there are enough people who are tired of being silent that will find volunteers. But David, I need you to build protections for them. Legal shields, media training, security if necessary. Nobody who tells their story gets abandoned to face consequences alone. Understood. Send me access to the testimonials and I'll start identifying strong candidates for public advocacy. We'll need a mix, different demographics, different types of abuse, different family employers to show this is systemic rather than isolated to the Thornhills. They discussed logistics for another 15 minutes before Avery ended the call. The sun was higher now, Chicago fully awake and moving with Sunday morning energy. Normally, she'd spend this day with Diana, visiting galleries or reading in their favorite coffee shop, letting the world slow down for a few hours. But normal had ended the moment Victoria Thornhill called Keisha a thief. Her phone rang with an unknown number. Avery almost ignored it, but something made her answer. Ms. Cole? The voice was male, older, with the cultured accent of inherited privilege. My name is Richard Ashford, Catherine's husband. I apologize for calling your personal number, but I felt this conversation required privacy. Avery's guard went up immediately. Mr. Ashford, if this is an attempt to negotiate some kind of reconciliation, it's not, he interrupted quietly. It's an apology, a genuine one, though I suspect you have little reason to believe that. He paused, and Avery heard something that sounded like shame in his silence. I wasn't at the gala last night. I had a medical appointment that ran long, and by the time I arrived, the event was over and Catherine was in our study making frantic phone calls. She told me what happened, her version first, and then I read the news reports and watched the video footage. They didn't match. No, Avery said carefully. I imagine they didn't. My wife is many things, Ms. Cole. Brilliant, driven, accomplished in ways that have genuinely advanced renewable energy technology. But she's also someone who's never had to question her assumptions about who belongs in which spaces. She grew up with wealth that made her believe certain people existed to serve and others to be served. I've watched it corrupt her judgment for years, told myself it was harmless because she was effective in business. Last night proved I was wrong. Avery said nothing, letting him continue. What she did to that young woman, Keisha Robinson, was unconscionable, and what my family failed to do, which was stop it or even question it, was equally unconscionable. We stood by and watched someone be humiliated over nothing because it was easier than challenging Catherine's authority. Richard's voice cracked slightly. I'm calling because I want you to know that not everyone in the Ashford family supports what happened. My daughter Sarah saw the footage and called me this morning. She was crying, asking how our family could be part of something so cruel. She's 17, Ms. Cole. She's growing up watching her mother treat people as disposable, and I'm terrified of what that's teaching her about power and worth. Then teach her something different, Avery said. You have a choice about what kind of family you want to be. Make it. That's what I'm trying to do. I've spent the morning reviewing contracts and legal documents, understanding for the first time how completely our merger depended on your architecture. Catherine kept saying you were just a consultant, that your role was peripheral. She was lying to me, or lying to herself, or both. He took a breath. I'm going to file for divorce, not because of the merger collapse, though that's certainly a factor, but because I can't be married to someone who treats human beings the way she treated that girl last night. And I'm going to make sure Sarah understands why. Avery felt her assumptions shift slightly. She'd categorized the Ashfords collectively as enablers and perpetrators, but Richard's call suggested more complexity. That's your decision to make, Mr. Ashford. But divorcing your wife doesn't undo the damage your family's wealth and behavior have caused to countless workers over the years. I know. Which is why I'm also calling to tell you that I'm establishing a foundation. $10 million initially, more as I restructure my assets. Its purpose will be to support workers who've been abused or exploited by wealthy employers. I want to fund legal advocacy, mental health services, job placement assistance. I want to create accountability where my family and families like mine have avoided it. That's admirable, Avery said slowly, but forgive me if I'm skeptical about wealthy people salving their conscience with charitable foundations while maintaining the systems that create the need for those foundations. You should be skeptical. I would be. Richard's voice was steady now, determined. But I'm not looking for redemption or praise. I'm looking to do something meaningful with resources I didn't earn and haven't used responsibly. If you're willing to consult on the foundation's structure to help ensure it actually serves workers rather than just making my family look better, I would be grateful. If not, I'll build it anyway and hope I get it right. Avery considered. Everything in her experience suggested this was a performance, a wealthy man trying to distance himself from consequences while maintaining his comfortable position. But she'd built a career on reading people, on identifying sincerity versus manipulation, and something in Richard's tone suggested genuine reckoning. I'll think about it, she said finally. If you're serious about this, have your attorneys contact Cole Global's legal department with a detailed proposal. We'll review it and decide if partnership makes sense. But Mr. Ashford, I'm going to hold you to a higher standard than you've probably been held to in your life. If this is performance, I'll expose it. If it's genuine, I'll support it. Those are your options. I understand. Thank you for taking the call. He paused. For what it's worth, what you did last night was extraordinary. Not just the business decision, though that took remarkable courage, but standing up for someone you didn't know, risking your own interests to defend her dignity, that's the kind of moral clarity this world needs more of. I hope my daughter grows up to be more like you than like her mother. He ended the call before Avery could respond. She sat holding her phone, processing the conversation and its implications. If Richard was genuine, he represented a crack in the unified wall of wealth that typically protected families like his from accountability. If he was performing, he was doing it with unusual commitment. Diana appeared in the doorway. Who was that? Richard Ashford, Catherine's husband. He's apparently filing for divorce and starting a foundation to support exploited workers. Do you believe him? I don't know yet, but I'm going to watch closely and find out. Avery stood and stretched, feeling the tension of 20 hours without sleep. I need to shower and change. We have a press conference to prepare for. Press conference? I'm making a formal statement this afternoon. If this is going to become a movement rather than just a moment, it needs clarity and direction. The Thornhills are controlling one narrative. I'm going to establish another. 3 hours later, Avery stood in Cole Global's main conference room facing 47 journalists from publications ranging from local Chicago papers to international financial media. She'd chosen a navy suit that projected authority without ostentation, her natural hair styled in a way that honored both professionalism and authenticity. Behind her, a screen displayed the Cole Global logo and nothing else. No flashy graphics, no distracting elements. Just her words, and her willingness to be held accountable for them. Thank you all for coming on short notice, she began, her voice clear and unwavering. I'm going to make a statement, and then I'll take questions. But first, I want to establish context for what happened last night at the Thornhill estate. She clicked a remote, and the screen behind her changed to display a document, the termination clause from the Ashford-Thornhill Partnership Agreement, with relevant sections highlighted. This is the contract the Thornhill and Ashford families signed 18 months ago when they engaged Cole Global to structure the financial architecture for their merger. Section 12, subsection 4 explicitly permits either party to terminate the partnership under circumstances including fundamental values misalignment. Last night, at a gala celebrating that merger, I witnessed the Thornhill family publicly humiliate a young catering worker, accusing her of theft without evidence, threatening to destroy her employment prospects, and treating her with a level of cruelty that demonstrated values incompatible with Cole Global's standards. She paused, letting the words settle. I invoked the termination clause. The international investment partnerships that made the merger possible withdrew their participation as contractually specified when Cole Global's involvement ended. Within hours, I redirected those partnerships to Meridian Energy Group, who will use the same financial architecture to pursue the same renewable energy goals with leadership that understands power requires accountability. Hands shot up immediately, journalists eager to ask questions. Avery raised her own hand for silence. I know there are questions about whether this was an overreaction, whether destroying a $900 million deal over a staff discipline issue represents sound judgment. Let me be clear about something. This was never about a single incident. It was about a pattern of behavior that treats vulnerable workers as disposable, that wields power without accountability, that assumes wealth exempts people from basic human decency. The Thornhill family's treatment of Keisha Robinson was not an isolated mistake. It was a revelation of values that have apparently governed their household for years. She clicked the remote again. The screen filled with excerpted testimonials from the emails Cole Global had received. Names and identifying details redacted, but stories preserved. Since last night, Cole Global has received over 600 communications from workers who've experienced similar treatment from wealthy employers. Firings without cause, wage theft disguised as household budgeting, sexual harassment protected by NDAs and fear of retaliation, systematic erosion of dignity from people who believed their wealth made them immune to consequences. Another click. The screen now showed a simple mission statement. Cole Global is announcing the Accountability Initiative, a comprehensive program partnering with legal organizations, advocacy groups, and policy experts to create consequences for employers who abuse their power. We will fund legal representation for workers who've been exploited. We will document patterns of abuse and refer criminal behavior to appropriate authorities. We will work with legislators to close loopholes that allow wealthy families to avoid accountability for labor violations. And we will use our position in international finance to make it clear that companies and families who treat workers as disposable will not have access to Cole Global's expertise or partnerships. The room erupted with questions, voices overlapping in their urgency. Avery pointed to Jasmine Wu, whose coverage had helped catalyze the public response. Ms. Cole, aren't you concerned this will damage Cole Global's reputation among the wealthy clients who typically need sophisticated financial architecture? You're essentially declaring that you won't work with a significant portion of the market. I'm declaring that I won't work with abusers, Avery corrected. There's a difference. Plenty of wealthy families and companies treat their workers with dignity and respect. Those are exactly the clients Cole Global wants to serve. But if our market narrows because we're excluding exploiters, I'm comfortable with that. Profit without principles is just accumulation. I'm not interested in building that kind of company. She pointed to a reporter from the Wall Street Journal. Ms. Cole, the Thornhills are claiming you violated contractual obligations and acted emotionally rather than professionally. How do you respond? I respond by inviting anyone to read the contracts, which I've made publicly available. The termination was executed precisely as specified in agreements they signed. As for acting emotionally, I consider defending human dignity to be supremely rational. What's actually emotional is believing your wealth exempts you from basic decency and then having a public meltdown when someone holds you accountable. Scattered laughter rippled through the press room. Avery pointed to another journalist. What about Keisha Robinson? Where is she now? Ms. Robinson is receiving support from multiple sources, including legal representation and employment opportunities that don't require her to work for families who view her as disposable. Beyond that, I'm respecting her privacy. She didn't ask to become the center of a national conversation about wealth and accountability. She was just trying to do her job. The questions continued for 40 minutes, each one probing different angles of the story. Avery answered with consistent clarity, never defensive, never apologetic. She'd made a choice, and she was standing by it, willing to accept consequences while refusing to pretend she'd done anything wrong. Finally, a young reporter from a progressive publication raised his hand. "Ms. Cole, some people are saying what you did last night was heroic. Others are saying it was reckless. How do you see it?" Avery considered the question carefully. "I see it as necessary. Heroism suggests exceptional courage in extraordinary circumstances. But defending someone from public humiliation shouldn't require exceptional courage. It should be baseline human decency. The fact that it's being called heroic reveals how normalized we've become to watching vulnerable people get crushed by powerful ones. I don't want to be a hero. I want to live in a world where what I did last night is so common it doesn't make news. Until that world exists, I'm going to keep using whatever power I have to create accountability where it's been absent." She ended the press conference and returned to her office, where Marcus was waiting with updates. The Thornhill's attorneys had sent another threatening letter. 3 more major clients had reached out expressing interest in working with Cole Global specifically because of the values demonstrated last night. Richard Ashford's foundation proposal had arrived, detailed and surprisingly thoughtful. And somewhere in Chicago, Keisha Robinson had enrolled in Cole Global's internship program, her first day scheduled for the following Monday. Avery looked out her office window at the city stretched below, thinking about all the invisible people keeping it running, cleaning offices after everyone left, serving food in restaurants, driving cars for families who never learned their names. How many of them had stories like Keisha's? How many had been humiliated, threatened, discarded by people who believed their wealth made them untouchable? Too many. Far too many. But last night, one of those people had been defended. One act of cruelty had met consequences instead of silence. One powerful family had learned that their assumptions about immunity were wrong. It wasn't enough. Not remotely enough. But it was a beginning. And beginnings, Avery had learned over years of building something from nothing, required relentless follow-through to become transformations. Monday morning arrived with the weight of consequences settling across Chicago like fog. Avery woke at 5, her internal clock refusing to acknowledge that Sunday had offered no rest. Diana was still sleeping, her breathing steady and peaceful in a way Avery envied. She dressed quietly and made her way to Cole Global's offices before sunrise, the city still dark and dreaming around her. The building's lobby was empty except for security, but when Avery reached her floor, she found lights already blazing. Marcus had beaten her there, along with Jennifer Hassan and her team of attorneys. They'd transformed the main conference room into a war room, walls covered with documentation, timelines, and organizational charts mapping patterns of abuse across wealthy Chicago families. "You've been busy," Avery said, surveying the organized chaos. Jennifer looked up from a laptop, her eyes bright despite obvious exhaustion. "We've categorized 843 testimonials so far. 62 cases have clear legal merit for civil action. 14 involve potential criminal behavior that we're referring to authorities. The patterns are exactly what you'd expect: wage theft, sexual harassment, wrongful termination, assault, and systematic psychological abuse disguised as household management." Marcus handed Avery coffee without being asked, his movements efficient despite running on the same minimal sleep as everyone else. The Thornhills hired crisis management. They're planning a counteroffensive for today, press conference at 10, where they'll position themselves as victims of a vindictive consultant with a history of instability. They've apparently found former colleagues willing to speak about your difficult personality. Avery smiled grimly. Difficult personality. That's what they call women who refuse to accept disrespect quietly. Let them try. Do we have the counter-narrative ready? We do. David Chen emerged from a side office, his suit somehow still crisp despite the early hour. "I've identified 12 workers willing to go public with their stories about the Thornhill and Ashford families specifically. Different types of abuse, different time frames, all documented with employment records, witness statements, and in 3 cases, recordings the workers made to protect themselves. We're calling it the Invisible Voices testimony, and we're releasing it 1 hour before their press conference." "Show me," Avery said. David pulled up a video on the main screen. A middle-aged Latina woman appeared, her face calm but her eyes carrying decades of accumulated pain. "My name is Rosa Martinez," she began in accented English. "I worked for the Thornhill family for 12 years as head housekeeper. During that time, I witnessed and experienced treatment that I stayed silent about because I needed the job, and they made it clear that speaking up would mean never working in Chicago again. I watched Victoria Thornhill scream at a young maid for 20 minutes because a towel wasn't folded correctly, calling her stupid and worthless, threatening to have her deported even though she was a legal resident. I had wages withheld for imagined mistakes. I was required to work holidays without overtime pay because Mrs. Thornhill said I should be grateful to work for such an important family. And when I finally left, they refused to provide a reference because I gave only 2 weeks' notice instead of the month they demanded." Rosa's testimony continued for 3 minutes, detailed and devastating. David showed Avery 5 more videos: a former chef, a gardener, 2 personal assistants, and a nanny, each one calmly recounting years of systematic abuse from families who believed their wealth made them untouchable. "These drop at 9, David said. Coordinated release across social media, sent directly to every major news outlet, posted on a dedicated website where others can add their testimonials. By the time the Thornhills start their press conference at 10, the narrative will already be established. They'll be responding to us rather than controlling the conversation." "Good." Avery checked her watch. "I have a meeting with Meridian at 8. Jennifer, I want preliminary legal strategies ready by noon. Marcus, monitor the Thornhill response and flag anything that crosses into defamation territory. David, stay ahead of the media cycle. This is going to move fast." The Meridian meeting was everything Avery needed it to be: focused, strategic, and grounded in shared values rather than just shared interests. Their CEO, Patricia Morrison, was a woman in her 50s who'd built her career in renewable energy when it was still considered a fringe industry. She understood what it meant to be underestimated. "Ms. Cole," Patricia began as they settled into Cole Global's executive conference room, "I want to be direct. Meridian is grateful for this opportunity, but we're not naive about why we're receiving it. You didn't choose us because we're the best option. You chose us because we weren't the Thornhills." "Actually," Avery corrected, "I chose you because in 18 months of building the Ashford-Thornhill merger, I researched every major player in renewable energy infrastructure. Meridian has consistently demonstrated innovation, integrity, and a company culture that treats workers as assets rather than expenses. Your employee retention rate is 87% in an industry where 50% is normal. Your leadership team is 40% women and 60% people of color in a sector that's notoriously homogeneous, and your technology patents, while less extensive than the Ashfords, are built on sounder scientific principles. I didn't choose you as a second option. I chose you as the option I should have pursued first if I hadn't been blinded by the Thornhills' reputation." Patricia's expression shifted from cautious to genuinely moved. "Then let's build something worthy of that assessment. What do you need from us?" They spent 2 hours mapping implementation timelines, governance structures, and accountability mechanisms. Avery made clear that Cole Global's continued involvement required Meridian to maintain the labor standards and ethical practices that had earned them this opportunity. Patricia didn't just agree. She proposed making those standards contractually binding and publicly transparent. "If we're positioning this partnership as a values-driven alternative to the Thornhill approach," Patricia said, "then we should be willing to be held accountable for those values. Annual third-party audits of our labor practices, public reporting on wage equity and working conditions, worker representation and governance decisions. Make it impossible for us to become what the Thornhills were." Avery felt something settle in her chest. The recognition that she'd made the right choice not just in leaving the Thornhills, but in choosing Meridian as their replacement. "I'll have our legal team draft language for those provisions. If you're willing to build transparency into the foundation of this partnership, we'll create something unprecedented in this industry." By 9:30, the Invisible Voices testimonials had been viewed over 2 million times. Social media was erupting with responses ranging from outrage to solidarity to privileged people suddenly realizing their own complicity in similar dynamics. The hashtag #ProtectWorkers was trending nationally, with stories pouring in from across the country about mistreatment by wealthy employers. Avery watched the numbers climb on her office monitor while taking calls from 3 different legislators who wanted to discuss potential policy reforms. The momentum was building faster than she'd anticipated, transforming from one family's downfall into a genuine reckoning with how American wealth wielded power over vulnerable workers. At 9:45, Marcus appeared in her doorway with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The Thornhills just canceled their press conference," he said quietly. Avery looked up sharply. "Canceled?" 15 minutes ago. No explanation given to the media. But sources inside their PR firm say Charles saw the Invisible Voices testimonials and realized they couldn't compete with that narrative. Apparently he's locked himself in his study and won't speak to anyone. Marcus pulled up his phone and showed Avery a screenshot. Victoria posted this on social media 10 minutes ago. The post was brief and clearly written by attorneys rather than Victoria herself. The Thornhill family deeply regrets the pain caused to workers who felt mistreated during their employment. We are committed to reviewing our household practices and making necessary changes to ensure all future employees are treated with dignity and respect. That's not an apology, Avery observed. That's damage control. Agreed, but it's an admission. And coming 12 hours after they called you vindictive and emotionally unstable, it's basically a surrender. Marcus hesitated. There's more. Gregory Thornhill was arrested an hour ago. Avery's attention sharpened. For what? Assault. Apparently one of the testimonials we received documented an incident where Gregory physically attacked a driver who refused to work unpaid overtime. The driver pressed charges but was pressured to drop them after the Thornhills threatened legal retaliation. When our testimonial project launched, he refiled with the support of our legal team. Chicago PD executed a warrant this morning. Good, Avery said simply. The word carried the weight of years watching powerful men avoid consequences for violence against vulnerable people. Make sure he has no preferential treatment. If he gets bail, document it. If charges get reduced, document it. I want a record of every advantage his family tries to buy him. Her phone rang with an unknown number. This time when she answered, the voice was female, young, and shaking with emotion. Ms. Cole? This is Sarah Ashford, Richard's daughter. I know you don't know me, but I wanted to call because I watched everything that happened and I needed to say thank you. Avery leaned back in her chair, surprised by the call's vulnerability. You don't need to thank me, Sarah. Yes, I do. My whole life I've watched my mother treat people like they were invisible if they weren't rich or important. I thought that was normal. I thought that's just how the world worked. Some people matter and some people are just there to serve. But seeing what you did, seeing you defend that girl and destroy the merger to make a point about dignity and accountability, it changed something for me. Sarah's voice cracked. My dad's divorcing my mom. Did he tell you that? He mentioned it. I'm going to live with him. I told my mom this morning that I can't respect someone who treats people the way she treated Keisha Robinson. She's furious with me, saying I'm being dramatic and influenced by social media, but I don't care. I don't want to grow up to be like her. I want to grow up to be like you. Avery felt the weight of that statement. A 17-year-old girl choosing values over comfort, choosing difficult truths over easy inheritance. Sarah, you don't want to be like me. You want to be like yourself, but the version that refuses to accept cruelty as normal. That's harder than emulating anyone else, but it's the only path that matters. Will you meet with me sometime? My dad's starting that foundation, and I want to be involved. I want to learn how to use privilege for something other than protecting privilege. I'll meet with you, Avery promised. And Sarah, what you're doing takes more courage than what I did. I had power and resources. You're challenging your entire family structure with nothing but conviction. That's extraordinary. After ending the call, Avery sat quietly for a moment, thinking about generational change and how transformation sometimes required children to reject their parents' values in order to build something better. Sarah Ashford was 17 years old and already demonstrating more moral clarity than adults 3 times her age. That mattered in ways that extended far beyond the immediate situation. By noon, the story had evolved beyond the Thornhill collapse into something larger. Major publications were running investigative pieces about labor practices among wealthy families across America. Legislators in 3 states had announced plans to introduce bills strengthening protections for domestic workers. The hashtag #ProtectWorkers had generated over 15 million engagements, with people sharing stories, organizing advocacy groups, and demanding accountability from employers who'd operated with impunity for years. Avery's office had become a coordination center for something that was rapidly exceeding her initial vision. Jennifer's legal team had expanded to 47 attorneys working pro bono on worker cases. David's PR firm was fielding hundreds of media requests daily. Marcus was managing logistics for what was essentially becoming a movement, with chapters forming in 12 cities and workers organizing for the first time around shared experiences of exploitation. At 2 in the afternoon, Keisha Robinson walked into Cole Global's offices for her first day as an intern. Avery watched from her office window as Marcus gave her a tour, the young woman's face a mixture of awe and disbelief, as she took in the space where decisions affecting billions of dollars were made daily. When they reached Avery's office, Marcus knocked gently. "Ms. Cole, Keisha's here for orientation. Did you want to say hello?" Avery came to the door and found Keisha dressed in professional attire that was clearly new, crisp slacks and a blouse that still had tag creases. Her face held the same vulnerability from Saturday night, but something else too. Hope, maybe, or determination. Possibly both. "Keisha, welcome to Cole Global." "Thank you, Ms. Cole, for everything, for defending me, for this opportunity, for—" Her voice broke. "I keep trying to find words big enough for what you did, but nothing fits." "You don't need big words. You just need to show up, work hard, and remember that what happened Saturday night wasn't your fault. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then we're good. Marcus will get you settled with your team. If you need anything, my door is open." Literally open, by the way. I don't believe in closed doors unless conversations require confidentiality. Power shouldn't hide behind barriers. Keisha nodded, tears forming in her eyes again, and followed Marcus down the hallway toward the intern bullpen. Avery watched her go, thinking about all the young people who deserved opportunities but never received them because they lacked the right connections or backgrounds. How many Keishas were out there, brilliant and hardworking and completely invisible to the people who controlled access to success? Too many. But at least one was getting a chance now. The afternoon brought a development Avery hadn't anticipated. Catherine Ashford appeared in Cole Global's lobby at 3:30, unannounced and alone. Security called up immediately, asking if Avery wanted the visit refused. "Let her come up," Avery said, curious about what could possibly bring Catherine here after everything that had happened. Catherine emerged from the elevator looking diminished in ways that had nothing to do with physical stature. Her clothes were still expensive, her posture still proud, but something essential had cracked. She stood in Avery's doorway like a general surveying conquered territory. "Ms. Cole, thank you for seeing me. I haven't decided if I'm seeing you or just observing what happens when consequences arrive for people who've avoided them too long. Come in." Catherine entered and sat without being invited, a power move that might have worked in other contexts, but here just seemed desperate. "I came to apologize." "Did you?" Avery's tone made clear it wasn't a question. "Not the kind of apology my lawyers wrote for social media. A real one. To you directly." Catherine's hands twisted in her lap, betraying agitation her face tried to hide. "What I did Saturday night was unforgivable. How I treated that girl, how I spoke to you, how I assumed and accused without evidence. There's no excuse for it. I was wrong." "You were. But here's what I'm curious about, Mrs. Ashford. Are you apologizing because you've genuinely reconsidered your values, or because the consequences of your behavior turned out to be expensive?" Catherine was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried something that might have been genuine self-awareness. "Both. Is that honest enough for you? I'm apologizing because I've lost my husband, my daughter's respect, my professional reputation, and a merger I spent years building. But I'm also apologizing because I spent last night reading testimonials from people who worked for my family, and I didn't recognize the person they described even though I know it was me. I thought I treated workers well. I thought I was fair and reasonable. But fair and reasonable by whose standards? Mine. The standards of someone who's never had to worry about losing housing or health care or the ability to feed her children. So you've had an awakening," Avery said, her skepticism evident. I don't know if I'd call it that. I'd call it being forced to see things I've been successfully avoiding for decades. My husband is divorcing me. My daughter told me this morning that she doesn't want to be like me, that she's ashamed of how I treat people. My business partners are distancing themselves so quickly I can hear the wind they're creating. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. I'm being held accountable for the first time in my life, and I don't know how to process it except to try to make amends where possible. Amends aren't possible, Avery said bluntly. You can't undo years of making people feel worthless. You can't apologize away the psychological damage of systematic dehumanization. The best you can do is stop causing new harm and maybe, if you're genuinely committed, start creating accountability for people like who you used to be. Then that's what I'll do. Catherine pulled out a folder and placed it on Avery's desk. This is a comprehensive accounting of every person who's worked for my family in the last 20 years. Names, employment dates, reasons for termination if applicable. I've also included financial records showing wages paid, overtime disputed, and instances where I now recognize we may have violated labor laws. I'm giving you full access to use this information however you see fit: legal action, advocacy work, public disclosure. Whatever creates accountability. Avery pulled the folder closer but didn't open it, studying Catherine's face instead. Why would you do this? You're essentially providing ammunition for people to sue you. Because my daughter asked me this morning if I was a good person. She was crying when she asked it, and the fact that she didn't know the answer destroyed something in me. Catherine's voice was barely above a whisper now. I can't change the past. I can't undo the hurt I've caused. But maybe I can make sure other people like me understand that their wealth doesn't exempt them from basic decency. If that means facing lawsuits and public condemnation, then that's what I deserve. Avery was quiet, calculating sincerity versus performance. Catherine had every reason to manipulate this situation, to perform contrition while protecting her interests. But the folder on the desk represented genuine exposure, real legal vulnerability. Either Catherine was exceptionally sophisticated in her manipulation, or she was experiencing the kind of fundamental reckoning that sometimes occurred when consequences arrived for people who'd never faced them. I'll review this, Avery said finally. If it's genuine, we'll use it to help workers who were harmed. If it's theater designed to rehabilitate your reputation, I'll expose it as such. Those are your options. I understand. Catherine stood to leave, then paused at the door. You asked if I was apologizing because of the cost, or because I'd reconsidered my values. The truth is, I don't know yet. Maybe genuine change only happens when it's expensive enough to force it. Maybe I'm only capable of growth because the alternative is complete collapse. That's probably not the answer you wanted, but it's the honest one. She left without waiting for a response. Avery sat alone in her office, the folder unopened on her desk, thinking about transformation and accountability and whether people could genuinely change or if they just learned better performance of acceptable values. Her phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. The Thornhill legal team just sent settlement offers to 12 former employees who are part of our testimonial project. Substantial offers. They're trying to buy silence. Avery typed back immediately. Connect those workers with Jennifer's team. Document every offer. If anyone wants to settle, that's their choice. But make sure they understand the Thornhills are trying to prevent pattern documentation. Give them full information and let them decide. The week accelerated from there. Tuesday brought news that 3 other Chicago families with histories of worker exploitation had proactively contacted Cole Global, offering to fund worker support programs and submit to labor practice audits. Wednesday saw the introduction of the Domestic Worker Protection Act in the Illinois legislature, directly inspired by the testimonials Jennifer's team had compiled. Thursday delivered confirmation that Meridian Energy Group's partnership with Cole Global was moving forward faster than projected, with international investors enthusiastic about the values-driven approach. By Friday, the Accountability Initiative had received over 3,000 testimonials, documented 147 cases with clear legal merit, and connected workers with pro bono legal representation that had already resulted in 12 settlements and 4 criminal referrals. The movement that had started with one woman defending one worker in one ballroom had transformed into a genuine challenge to how wealth wielded power over vulnerable people. Avery spent Friday afternoon in her office reviewing progress reports when her assistant announced a visitor. "Ms. Cole, there's a delivery for you. The courier says it's personal and requires your signature." The package was small, wrapped in expensive paper with no return address. Avery opened it carefully to find a handwritten note and a check. The note was brief, written in elegant script. "Ms. Cole, I am Charles Thornhill III. I'm sure this letter surprises you, as I imagine you expected never to hear from me again except through lawyers. But I'm writing because I've spent this week doing something I haven't done in decades, truly examining my family's behavior and my own complicity in systems that harm vulnerable people. What you did Saturday night was devastation from my perspective. You destroyed a merger, damaged my family's reputation, and cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. You were supposed to be the hired help making our vision possible, and instead you became the architect of our downfall. It has taken me 5 days to understand that every word of that previous sentence reflects exactly the problem you were trying to illuminate. You were never the hired help. You were the foundation we built upon while pretending we built ourselves. And the fact that I'm only understanding this now, after public humiliation forced me to confront it, tells you everything you need to know about how deeply these assumptions run. I cannot apologize adequately for how you were treated, how Keisha Robinson was treated, or how countless workers have been treated by my family over generations. Words are insufficient. So instead, I'm enclosing a check for $50 million to be donated to the Accountability Initiative or any worker advocacy program you deem appropriate. This is not atonement. Nothing could atone for years of systematic dehumanization. This is simply the best action I can take with resources I've realized I don't deserve. Use it to help people my family has hurt and to prevent other families from causing similar harm. It won't make us even. Nothing will. But perhaps it will mean something to workers who've been invisible for too long. Charles Thornhill III. Avery stared at the check. $50 million. More than the Thornhills had stood to make from the merger in its first 3 years. Money that could fund legal advocacy, policy reform, and worker support programs at a scale she'd barely begun to envision. She called Jennifer immediately. How fast can we scale the Accountability Initiative if funding isn't a constraint? Jennifer's response was cautious. Depends on the funding level. Why? Because I'm about to deposit $50 million. Charles Thornhill just made a donation. Silence. Then, holy shit, is this real? The check is real. Whether his contrition is real remains to be determined, but the money spends the same either way. Avery pulled up her laptop and began drafting plans. Here's what I'm thinking. We expand to 20 cities immediately, full legal teams in each location, partnership with labor organizing groups, policy advocacy at state and federal levels. And we create a public database of wealthy employers who've been credibly accused of worker exploitation, searchable, maintained, and available to anyone considering employment with these families. That last part will generate lawsuits, Jennifer warned. Good, let them sue. Discovery will be illuminating, and I'm happy to spend Thornhill's money defending the right to document patterns of abuse. Avery's mind was racing now, seeing possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to envision when resources were constrained. Jennifer, what we're building here, it's bigger than one family's downfall. It's a genuine challenge to how American wealth operates. We need to scale it appropriately. They spent 2 hours mapping expansion plans before Avery finally ended the call and allowed herself to sit quietly in the gathering darkness of her office. Through the windows, Chicago glittered with weekend energy, people finishing work weeks and beginning whatever relaxation or recreation their resources allowed. Somewhere in those lights, workers were being exploited by employers who believed their wealth made them immune to consequences. Somewhere, vulnerable people were being crushed by power that faced no accountability. But also somewhere in those lights, the Accountability Initiative was operating. Lawyers were reviewing cases, advocates were organizing workers, legislators were drafting protections, and people who'd been invisible were finding their voices, telling their stories, demanding dignity instead of accepting cruelty as the price of survival. Avery's phone chimed with a message from Keisha. Ms. Cole, I just finished my first week. I wanted to say thank you again, not just for the job, but for showing me that powerful people don't have to be cruel. You changed my understanding of what's possible. I'll work hard to deserve this opportunity. Avery typed back simply, "You already deserve it. Now go build something extraordinary." She set her phone down and opened the bottom drawer of her desk, pulling out a folder she'd kept since Cole Global's founding. Inside were rejection letters from every firm that had refused to hire her when she was starting out. Dozens of them, each one finding polite ways to say she didn't fit, wasn't right, should perhaps consider administrative positions instead of analytical ones. She'd kept them as motivation, as reminders of everyone who'd underestimated her. Now she added one more document to the folder, a printed copy of the Ashford-Thornhill merger termination notice. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that power without accountability became cruelty, and that she'd chosen accountability even when it cost her hundreds of millions of dollars. The choice had been expensive, but it had also been necessary. And in the weeks since that Saturday night at the Thornhill estate, the expense had transformed into something more valuable than profit. A genuine movement towards systemic change, workers finding collective power, and a reckoning for families who'd believed their wealth exempted them from basic human decency. Diana appeared in her doorway carrying takeout and wine, her presence a reminder that life existed beyond boardrooms and accountability initiatives. "Come home," Diana said simply. "You've changed the world enough for 1 week. Let it breathe." Avery stood, suddenly aware of bone-deep exhaustion that she'd been holding at bay through sheer momentum. She followed Diana to the elevator, leaving Cole Global's offices behind, but taking with her the knowledge that Monday would bring new challenges, new testimonials, new opportunities to create accountability where it hadn't existed. The city spread out below them as they drove home, lights reflecting off Lake Michigan in patterns that suggested infinite possibility. Somewhere in that vastness, the Thornhill family was coming to terms with the true cost of their assumptions. Somewhere, Keisha Robinson was planning her future with resources she'd never expected to access. Somewhere, workers were organizing and advocating and refusing to be invisible anymore. And in a penthouse in Lincoln Park, Avery Cole poured wine and allowed herself to acknowledge something she'd known since Saturday night, but hadn't quite articulated. She'd spent her career building financial architecture that made other people's visions possible, and in doing so, she'd sometimes made herself invisible in service of their visibility. Not anymore. From now on, she would build structures that elevated people who deserved elevation, that created accountability for those who'd avoided it, and that made invisibility impossible for workers whose labor made everything else possible. The Thornhill Gala had been meant as a celebration of wealth and power and dynastic success. Instead, it had become a catalyst for transformation, a moment when someone with power had chosen to use it for accountability rather than accumulation. Avery raised her glass toward the city lights, toward all the invisible people making the world function while others took credit. "To consequences," she said quietly. Diana touched her glass to Avery's. "And to the courage it takes to create them." They drank, and outside the windows, Chicago breathed and pulsed and continued its eternal dance of power and vulnerability, wealth and need, visibility and invisibility. But the equation had shifted slightly. The balance had moved, and somewhere in the darkness, workers who'd been crushed by the powerful were learning that power could be challenged, that cruelty could meet consequences, and that dignity wasn't a privilege to be granted but a right to be defended. One woman in an ivory dress had walked into a ballroom and walked out having changed the landscape of accountability for an entire social class. Not because she was exceptional, though she was, but because she'd made a choice that anyone with power could make, to use that power for something larger than self-interest. The Thornhills would rebuild eventually, though never to the heights they'd once occupied. Catherine Ashford would continue her reckoning, genuine or performed. Richard's foundation would operate, creating ripples of accountability in spaces that had resisted it. Sarah would grow into someone different from her mother, shaped by the understanding that privilege required responsibility. And Avery would continue building, not just financial structures now, but social ones, using Cole Global's resources and reputation to create a world where what happened to Keisha Robinson became impossible rather than inevitable. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice, not fully. It was transformation. Slow, difficult, expensive transformation. The kind that required dismantling structures people had spent generations building challenging assumptions people had never thought to question, and choosing principles over profits even when the cost was staggering. But as Avery stood in her penthouse looking out at the city she'd conquered and was now reimagining, she understood something fundamental. The highest use of power wasn't accumulation, it was accountability. And the truest measure of success wasn't wealth, it was the number of people you elevated rather than crushed on your way to acquiring it. Saturday night at the Thornhill estate, she'd been mistaken for the help and ordered back to the kitchen. She could have corrected the assumption, accepted the apology that would have followed, and continued with an evening that would have made her hundreds of millions of dollars richer. Instead, she'd made a phone call that cost the Thornhills everything and created something far more valuable than money. A reminder that power without accountability was just cruelty with resources, and that someone was always watching, always calculating, always ready to create consequences when the powerful assumed immunity. The billionaires had made their mistake, and Avery Cole had made sure the entire world learned from it.